Hi guys, welcome back. Thanks for joining us again. We are getting close to the end of our first day, which is very exciting. I'm going to be presenting about our digital speaking tasks on the ESL Library platform, but I hope it'll give you guys some good ideas. Even if you're not an ESL Library subscriber, I hope it will give you some inspiration for what you can use in your classroom. I'm going to be joined with Tara and Tanya, and they'll be hanging out in the chat and the Q&A to respond to all of your questions. For those of you who missed their coffee talk earlier this morning, they did a coffee talk about grammar. They are two key members of our publishing team. They're the heart and soul of ESL Library's content. So we are so lucky to have them there to respond to all of your questions. And I don't think there will be anything that I can answer that they can't, but I will answer questions at the end if I have a little bit of time. So I'm looking forward to having them hanging out in the chat with you guys. All right, I am going to start sharing my screen. By the way, after my presentation, before I get into it, we're doing a social hour. So we would love if you guys are able to join us for the social hour after this. It'll be a full hour of going to theme tables and social networking. Should be a lot of fun. And then we'll have our wrap up with Ben at the very end of the day. All right, so let me go ahead, share my screen for you guys. And Tara, if you would mind just confirming you can see that okay?
You're good.
I'm good? Okay. I was going to say, not sure if it takes a second or...
It did take a second, sorry.
Finding our way to the chat. Okay, perfect. Great. So here we are in ESL Library, our home. We're here. If you were able to join me for the Lunch and Learn, I did a demo of the whole platform, just a very quick overview. I wanted to take some time to really do a deeper dive into our amazing speaking tasks that we have on the platform. And like I said, if you're a member of ESL Library, you have access to all of this and they're fantastic. You can use them to teach live. You can use them to assign them to your students for outside of classwork, or maybe you want to even use it as an in-class assessment. That's an option as well. But if you're not a subscriber, no problem. We hope that this can inspire you with different ways that you might approach speaking tasks. And there are so many on the site. I really can't cram them all into this one period that we have today. So I decided I would just show a few snippets, a few speaking tasks that you can use for assessments or maybe student placement. At the beginning of the year, or the beginning of a class, you might want to put your students into different levels. Also some different speaking tasks that you can use for in-class discussion and debate, that really meaningful engagement that we want with our students. And then also a few speaking tasks that I think really excel at outside of the classroom work that you can assign to your students for practice. All right, so let's hop right to it. On our platform, we have our materials drop-down menu, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with. And as I mentioned, there are tons of materials here. I think all of these can be used for speaking and assessment, placement, in-class discussion, outside of class practice. However, I want to start with our resources because I feel like the resources are sometimes a little bit underloved and they need a little extra emphasis. So we're going to start right off the bat with one or two different resources that can be used for speaking. And I wanted to start with our language scenes. I pointed these out in my earlier session because I love them and they're so open-ended. But the language scenes are basically, I love them for the idea of assessment and placement of students because they are so open-ended and they can be used with students of any age or any level. And that's why I love them so much. So we're going to click into At the Park. Just as an example, you can see there are a whole bunch here. The purple, by the way, are like a single image, and then the orange ones are a single image, and then almost an identical image, but there's like 10 differences between them. So they're really fun, but for a slightly different purpose. So we're going to look at the purple ones. Let's go into At the Park. And I'm going to hop right into the digital task player. By the way, this is an image with a lot going on. There's no reason that you don't need to be using the ESL Library resources. These are some great images that we have here, and I love them. You can see, here's an example of the At the Park language scene. But, you know, if you're in a city or you're out and you just want to snap a picture and use that with your students, you can do that as well for placement or assessment. But you can see there's just a lot happening. If I'm working with lower students, lower literacy level, I might ask them, like, what do you see? Or I might ask them to name, you know, one object that they see, or what color is this? I could point to a tree or something and say, what color is this? And this is a great activity because, again, you can use it one-on-one. You can use it, you know, I can pull up my tablet, sharing my screen with my students, and I can sit side by side with the student. We can look at it together and I can do individual assessment, or I can project it on a screen. I could have all of 40 of my students sitting in their seats and I can ask them, okay, number one, what color is this tree? Or what color is the roof? Or, you know, there's lots of different options of how I can assess my students depending on what their needs are, their age, their level. If they're a higher level, I might ask them to write a sentence or say a sentence. I might ask them to tell me a story. I might ask them if this reminds them of an experience they've had. And basically, it's so open-ended, right? You can do whatever you want with it. That's why I really like the language scenes. And I think they're a great resource for assessment or student placement. If you haven't used them before, take a peek. Also on the left-hand side, this is all of the different tasks. So there is a bit, you know, if you wanted to use this for a lesson or more of a homework activity, you can, of course. But that speaking assessment down at the very bottom, that's where you'll find this big image for your students. And all of these, as a reminder, can be assigned to your students as homework. Or if you wanted to assign it to them, maybe at the first 10 minutes of class, and then have it end 10 minutes after class begins, you can have them do this as like an in-class quiz or some kind of like less formal assessment if you wanted to just have them like name 10 objects at the beginning of class, and then it'll close and you can continue with the rest of your content. So one idea for you. Okay, let's leave that task idea. And let's hop over to another resource that we have. I'm going to go to our, what do I want? Our Speak Up task, which I believe is in our warm-ups and fillers. The warm-ups and fillers, obviously, they're meant to generate energy. So there's going to be a ton of these that are great for your students. Right at the top, you can see our conversation and speaking prompts. But I'm thinking right now of using these speaking activities for assessment. So one thing you might notice, this is a little bit unusual. We have 3 different levels of this Speak Up task right here. So let's just take a quick peek into the beginning to low intermediate one, and then also we can look at the more advanced level one. We're clicking into the lower level task, and on the left-hand side, this is unusual as well. Let me zoom in for you guys so you can see it bigger. You can see there's home and it's a speaking task. Family, it's a speaking task, right? This is a resource. Remember, it's not a lesson. And so there's just a whole bunch of different speaking activities for you here. You can choose different topics. And if you're trying to assess a low-level student's speaking ability, choosing topics that are about themselves is really, really a good choice. So if we click into something like home, you can use these questions to ask your students, you know, where do you live? And the other thing to notice is this is aimed at beginners or lower level students. So there's this picture to help prompt them as well. Again, you don't have to be using the ESL Library platform. You can create something like this for yourself, but this is nice. It's all kind of put together, ready for you if you did want to use the platform. And then there's a few questions here. Oops, let me hide that sidebar. Who do you live with? Do you like your home? And so these are questions that a lower level student could respond to. You can see there's other topics like family, school. If you're working with older students, you might want to talk about work or health. There's also Canada, the United States. So very familiar topics that they should be able to speak on without having a lot of background knowledge. They don't need to do reading to be able to respond to these. By reading, I mean, they don't have to do background reading for extra information. They do. If you're just showing them the screen, of course, they have to read this, right? If you want to read the question for them aloud to make it a little easier, then you can do that too. All right. And then to look and compare this lower level task, speaking task with, sorry, I'm zoomed in, it's hard to find my way around there, With the little bit lower, or with a little bit higher level, let's go to the Speak Up for the more advanced students and see how that compares. I'm noticing this teacher discretion label here. What's that about? That's just saying I should probably double check the content of this lesson before I share it with my students, just to make sure it's appropriate for them. And again, on the left-hand side, all these different speaking options. And you can see, I'll zoom in, that we have more abstract, more complex topics for my students to talk about: current events, social justice, gender inequality, things like that. So it's going to elicit more sentences, more reflection, things like that. And if I click into, let's say, the environment, you'll notice there's no picture, right? And that's why I think that this is great for assessment. Of course, I love pictures, right? Obviously, I showed you the language scenes, but in the case of assessment or placement, you might not want to have those images to get a better understanding of whether your students are understanding the vocabulary. So lots of different ways that you can use this for assessment, as I mentioned: one-on-one, large groups in a physical classroom, or if you are teaching remotely by sharing your screen, or assigning it to your students as a task for them to do at home or during class, right? Okay. Let's just take a look at a couple more. I'm going to hop into a lesson just to give us a little something different to look at. Go to materials, lessons. I'm going to zoom out a little bit here. And I want to point out our grammar practice worksheets, because we had that session on grammar this morning, and some of you might be thinking about, ooh, grammar. And that's just such an area where our students are often needing to get assessment. We do have some grammar tests right at the top, and if you click into a grammar test, I'm just going to show you really quickly. This is not really what I meant to show you, but I will show you this. You can see at the end of these sections, you have these speaking, on the left-hand side of the task list, there is a speaking option. And so this is let me show you this sidebar and zoom in for you. I feel like I didn't explain that well. We have all of these different types of grammar assessments: multiple choice, fill in the blank, all those standard things. But at the end, we do also have a speaking assessment for your students. So I just wanted to point out that that's there, where your students can just record an answer, or you can do this live and have your students write it, however you want to approach it. But I was more excited. We're going to back out of that grammar test 3 and go back to, oh, that was a resource. Let's go back to our lessons and that grammar practice worksheet section. And here we have all of our different grammar practice worksheets. And a lot of these have speaking activities that you can do with your students as well, if you want to do those digital speaking tasks. So if we hop into something like simple present, and we'll go to the task player, we can see that we have that speaking practice, very similar to what we saw in the grammar test. And we can help assess our students if you want to assess their speaking. And of course, if they're just reading this, you're also assessing their reading, right? At the same time, what is your favorite color? And they can record that. Lots of different ways you can use this. So basic questions there. And then this one has 4 different questions. How old are you? Meant to elicit that grammar point. All right. Let's leave that task. I want to show just 1 or 2 more grammar practice worksheets, and then we'll hop into looking at things that are more about discussion and generating in-class debate, using those digital tasks for that. Let's look at the count versus non-count. Where are you? There you are, under nouns and pronouns. I always love teaching count and non-count. So fun. That was probably one of the things I was most excited to learn about when I first became a language teacher. Grammar nerd. All right. So the speaking practice for this one, again, if you want to assess, it's exactly what you would expect. How much water do you drink a day? I should have been zooming in much more for you guys, sorry. How many pieces of fruit do you eat a week? So these are good questions, simple for your grammar assessment. All right. And if you're unfamiliar with our platform, we do have grammar points from like total beginner level all the way to things like reported speech and much much more advanced concepts for your students as well. Okay, let's hop into talking about generating that like in-class debate and discussion, which I think is what most of us tend to think of when we're thinking about using these speaking tasks or creating speaking activities in our classroom. I'm going to hop back to our resources section. And remember how I mentioned there was just a ton in the warm-ups and fillers? We're going to go back there because I love it. Right at the top, our conversation and speaking prompts. We were just looking at that speak up task before, which had a whole bunch of different topics on the left-hand side. We also have this really excellent resource called Conversation Questions. And then in parentheses, it says group digital. It's great for teaching digitally, and it's great if your students are working in groups and Zoom and breakout rooms, or of course, if you're just leading a class and you want to talk about it with them together. I'm going to click into the task player. And on the left-hand side, all of these different flashcard sets and different topics, which are really fun to discuss with your students. So if you want to talk about the environment with your students, you can click on it and it will reveal a picture. And if you click on the picture, it'll bring up a question. So this is great if you're in your classroom and you want to project something on the board. Maybe at the beginning of class, you just want to have a 5-minute question and your students can be challenged to go through as many of these questions as they can. Or you can give them like 30 seconds to pair up with other classmates, and then they have to respond to each question as quickly as possible. I love doing an activity where my students are in like circles, and this is only going to work if you're there in person, you know, with your students right now, but you can have an inner circle and an outer circle, and they have, you know, 1 minute to form their response. And then the other person has a minute to respond. And then they move and rotate one person. Then they have 30 seconds to give their response to the same question. And so these would be really good to support something like that. And you keep shortening the time. It becomes faster and faster. They get more practice and it reduces the amount of time they have. It's really funny and really silly. And it helps build their confidence because at first they, you know, are struggling at 1 minute to explain their thoughts. And then they are able to do it in 10 seconds. So I think it's a really fun activity. You could use something like this to generate conversation, or of course, just have them, you know, turn to the person next to them, or have a student leading a Zoom room and generating these conversations. And so you can see there's 12 different questions in here. And tomorrow I'm doing a workshop on our flashcards. You can create your own custom flashcard sets as well. And so this would be a great activity if you are, if somehow you're looking through this list of flashcards and you don't see something that you want to talk about with your students, but you have another idea in mind, you can find a flashcard that you love, and then you can just edit the text and put your own question there. So I like this because it's good inspiration for what you can create as well within our platform, but also, you know, if you're just building something for yourself. Okay. We're gonna exit out of that guy and hop over to our discussion starter section. Since we are talking about building discussion and having debates with our students, I would be remiss not to mention our discussion and debate section and our mini debates as well. So I showed very briefly the discussion starters earlier. Definitely one of my favorite categories that we have on the site. New and featured lessons always at the top. And I'm going to hop just straight into one of our new and featured lessons, which is personality types. Talk about a great topic for generating conversation with your students, especially if they're a little bit like intermediate or higher, I would say. But even you wouldn't want to use this exact lesson, but you could have a great discussion with lower level students by teaching words like shy, even introverted and extroverted. They're long words, but you know, you can teach targeted vocabulary. It's no easier to remember one word than another, really. So I think that would be a fun topic to discuss with your students. But if you go straight into the task player, we have our whole lesson built up here on the left. But you can also go into the personal response at the very end of the task list. And you'll be able to find these great questions, like what personality traits do you wish you had? So these are, I could imagine having like a 20-minute discussion with my friends about this. There'd be a lot of fun questions to ask. Also, there's the the discussion questions, pardon me, on the left-hand side, which is meant for, discussion or writing. But in this case, we're talking about speaking tasks, so we'll talk about writing here. So on the left-hand side, it has questions. How would you describe your personality? Do you think birth order is a factor in determining your personality? Lots of interesting questions. Sometimes, sometimes it's tiring trying to just think of a lot of different topics. And then when you see something like this, it just really inspires you. And you say, oh yeah, why didn't I not think to talk about that with my students? And I like that personality types is something really meaningful. It's about me, and people like to talk about themselves. Those are the words that they remember. That vocabulary is going to stick with them. And we can just point out a couple other discussion starters that I think would be really fun to do with your students. Something like secondhand versus new. This is a really interesting one. Again, you can just click into the task player. You can go to those discussion questions. In this case, there's just a few discussion questions that you can take a peek at, or you can find that personal response, and both of those would be really great. I love this, this question right here. I think it's so provocative for me. Are thrift shops a solution to the garbage problem? At least in Canada and the United States, I think a lot of people think thrift shops, they're amazing. But when you sit down and you really think about something like that deeply, I don't need to do a lot of extra reading. Maybe your students would want to do a little extra reading to be informed, and there's a lesson to support that. But this is a really interesting discussion that your students can have. And we have lots of other interesting topics. I'll show two that are where the questions are a little bit different than just a thoughtful question, although I love a good thoughtful question. Let's look at the lesson. This one is so fun, on procrastination. And let's see if I can find it. I'm just gonna Control F for it. Procrastination, there we go. Out of our education area, little section there. The procrastination lesson, if you have not seen this one, it's relatively new, so fun. I love the discussion or writing activity. Or do I? Yes, I do. But I think I wanted the personal response, because this one is really fun. It's, what is one task you've been postponing for a while, and what steps could you take to get it done? And one of these tasks over here, is it the productivity challenge? Sorry, we're doing this live here. Yeah, this is it. On the left-hand side, we're in the procrastination lesson under discussion starters. If you love this as much as I do, find your way there. Productivity challenge. So they can respond to this under the personal response and speaking, but this reference right here is, what do you want to tackle? Why is it so hard? Like, why is it so daunting? What's your deadline? What's something you can do to get it started? So basically it's helping them think about an actual problem they have, and then all the little pieces that lead up to that. I think that's a really fun, meaningful, authentic kind of question. It's doing more than just teaching language. And that's why I like this so much. It's helping them actually grow as people. And tomorrow we're talking about social emotional learning. I think this is the kind of lesson that really supports that. And sorry if I stepped on anyone's toes mentioning this lesson. I'm not sure if you guys are going to talk about it tomorrow, but it's really fantastic. Okay, and one more kind of different discussion starter that I just want to point out is the your name discussion starter. Speaking of, sorry, I'm just going to search for it. Your name. Speaking of social emotional learning and getting to know our students, at the beginning of the year, as we're trying to build those relationships with our students, Meg was talking about this, Ellii was talking about this, learning about our student's name in the background, that's so personal, so important. So again, this is one where they can do this little pronounce their name activity. I like it. They're not just pronouncing their name, although that's very useful. We have so many students that will take on an English name to make their life easier for the teacher, or because some teacher they've had in the past has suggested that it's a good idea. And if they want to, that's fantastic. But, you know, it's also nice if we can make the effort to learn our students' names if we're working with students from different cultures and language backgrounds from us. So having them say the name and pronounce it so that we can get that practice is really helpful. And then ask them like how many syllables their name has, if their name has a special meaning or history, and then if they have nicknames. So I thought that was a really fun, different kind of speaking activity that could generate really interesting in-class discussion, but also would be great if you wanted to assign it as homework to get a little practice. Okay. And one more just kind of different activity. I think everyone knows that if we're trying to generate discussion in class, it's better if your students are talking to each other. I feel like I'm modeling this very poorly right now. I hope that Tanya and Tara are having a lot of chat and Q&A discussions with you guys there on the side. But the more your students can speak to one another, obviously, the more language practice they get. If the teacher is just talking at the students, they're not getting that practice. They're getting listening practice, and that's really it. So the more group work you can encourage, the better. So I just want to show one group work activity that I really love. There's a whole bunch on the site, and actually, I'm gonna go rogue for a second here. This is dangerous. I'm gonna go into the PDF viewer real quick. Sometimes within our PDFs, we have pre-made. Here's a great example. Yay, I got lucky. We have these different group. They're not group. These are like class interview opportunities. These are not group projects, but it's an opportunity for students to go around and talk to one another, which works great if they're in Zoom rooms together, or if your students are, you know, physically in a classroom together. So these are nice opportunities for students to walk around, interview each other, and you'll find these in a lot of the discussion starters and in other lessons as well around the site. Whew, glad there was one right there. But for group work, more authentic group work, I'm going to search for a session that I already know about. Actually, let's go through and find it the way you guys would. Materials, and this is a resource again. Getting a lot of resource love today. In our visual learning area. And we have our lesson. Well, it's not a lesson, it's a resource. Correct myself. Part 1, the Nelson Mandela poster. This is, if you just click into the PDF viewer, you're just going to see a poster and you're not really going to know what this is about. So this is one of the rare resources where you really need to actually read the description here. We created this poster of things that used to be impossible based on a quote from Nelson Mandela. It always seems impossible until it's done. So that was the quote from him. We created this poster. And then we challenged our learners to use, there's a separate lesson plan on Nelson Mandela, so you can use that as support, or you can just give your students this task directly, where they then generate their own poster on things that used to be impossible, but aren't, or things that won't be impossible in the future, however you want to spin that for them. And again, just to show you the poster really quickly. So it used to be impossible to prove your innocence based on DNA, for example. And so it's just this great way that you could have your students working together to, and when they're working together, they're talking to each other. Some of you might be saying, my students are going to be talking in their own language. So that's something that you can work on with your students. I'm definitely not a teacher who thinks that using their own language in the classroom is a problem. But if you're trying to generate conversation and get English practice specifically, and that's the goal of the activity, let them know and make it a challenge and see how much English they can use. So I won't go into how to address those kinds of issues in your class, but I just wanted to remind you that group activities, they're fantastic. And creating a poster together is a really great activity. It also uses different modalities. They're artistic talents. So students that may not be as strong at English, but they're really artistic, that'll draw them in and get them more involved. So I love using different experience, different expertise when we can with our students, highlighting their talents, basically. Okay, so I've shown you a few different tasks, speaking tasks that you can use on the platform for assessment and placement. All of these really can be used, most of these can be used for assessment and placement. But also for that in-class discussion, I want to show you a few that you can also use for outside practice that I think are pretty great. So let's go to the word bank readers, and that is a section in our lessons. We'll look at a few different lessons. And word bank readers. So we have our word bank section, which has lots of different vocab to teach your students. And then if you're using some of those, our word bank readers are a great companion. So we'll click into that guy there. We have all these different, this is better for a little bit lower level. I would say even though intermediate students would probably enjoy this, even though it's labeled for beginners, it'll obviously just be a little bit easier for your intermediate students. And let's click into Hiro's apartment right here. So I'm going to show you the task player, but if your students are going to be doing out of class practice, you're going to want to assign it to them as homework. I'm not going to show you how to do that. I already showed it during the Lunch and Learn, and you can join me tomorrow for the Lunch and Learn if you weren't able to join us today. But let's just take a peek at what it is. I want to focus on showing you more resources today rather than how. There's a little bit of a lesson plan built up, but if you want them to get that practice, we have a watch and read aloud, which is a little bit different. This is a reference task. So your students, you can assign this to them where they're going to read and watch a story, and then they're going to practice reading it aloud. And we won't watch this whole thing. We'll just watch a few seconds of it. But it has about a 1-minute video that the students watch, and then the video continues with them being able to practice the sentences themselves. Let's see how we can do this.
Hiro's apartment. Hiro lives in an apartment building. His apartment is number 302.
Okay, so that'll go on for about a minute. And then as we progress through the video, I can't see my timestamps here because of this, but let's see if, oh, I guessed pretty close. Here we go. Working with these weird bars here.
Now you try.
Oh my gosh, I nailed it. So at the top, it's highlighting the words, and you can see it's going pretty quickly, right? Hiro lives in an apartment building, and it's highlighting them really at that speed that you would speak as a native speaker. So let your students know that this is native speaker speed. And here's the beauty of a video. They can press pause, right? If you've assigned this to them for out of class practice, tell them to press pause after every sentence and rewind and keep practicing. And whenever I practiced learning a new language, or I was working with my students about how to learn English, sometimes if there were these like syllables that just kind of were difficult for me to tease apart, I would actually have my students start from the end of the sentence. So I might have them listen a few times, right? They'd rewind, listen a few times, and then they could go building, apartment building, meant building, art meant building, apartment building. And they just kind of work backwards until they get all of those pieces together. It's just a different strategy to kind of, I think sometimes when you start from the beginning, you feel like you have to keep up and you're thinking like, oh, I have to make a perfect sentence really quickly. But if you start from the back, you're really thinking about what you're saying, how it sounds, trying to mimic the sound, and you're not really thinking of it as a sentence so much as like, you're training your tongue to kind of mimic those sounds. So anyway, this is a really cool activity. I like it as an outside of class activity if you can, because I think students will thrive with that time to practice on their own. But of course, you can do it in class. If your students have their own devices, you can give them time to practice it during class if you're working digitally, or if you are in class, maybe have them go into different groups and practice and just give them time to use this. But I think this is a really fantastic resource for them. So again, this is a word bank reader, and there's a few different ones of these. And then, of course, there's also a read aloud speaking task where your students can actually click the red button. They click to view the reference, and they'll have that whole story here. So they can record it after they've done that watch and read practice. And when they're done reading through this whole thing, they can go ahead and click stop. It's going to save their answer. They can re-listen to it. They can re-record if they want, and then they can submit it to you as homework. So that's pretty cool feature for them. All right, let's look at something a little bit different. Love those word bank readers though. Okay, we'll hop over to famous people. Famous people is in our lessons again. Oh, that's right where I was. Famous people is down towards the bottom in our reading and discovery area. I just sort of picked this one because I liked the idea behind it. A lot of the speaking tasks in this section have the students reading a quote and then they respond to the quote and just about something that's meaningful or about their own experience. So if I click into something, let's click into Maya Angelou, for example. I'll just show you one or two of these quotes. The quotes themselves on the left-hand side, you can find under reference. So if you just want to see the quote quickly, you can see that as a teacher. You could certainly just pull this up in class, show them the quote and give them 2 minutes or 10 minutes or whatever to talk about it. But if you're doing this as an outside of class assignment, just scroll down to the bottom and the personal response, number 10 in this case, is going to have them review that quote and then record the response. So again, they can just click the play button and it asks them, how do you feel about this quote? And to support the response with, like I said, a personal experience or some kind of observation. So they click to view the reference and they can see the quote right there and respond to that. And then when they're done, again, they just click stop. I didn't actually pay attention to what that quote was saying because I was talking to you guys. If you don't like something, change it. If you can't change it, change your attitude. All right. Yeah, I think that's a really important quote. A lot I could say, but I won't because I want to show another one. Let's just show one more. Let's, I was torn between Banksy and Jackie Chan. Let's do, here, I'll just search Jackie Chan. Let's do him because I feel like we've been missing out on some of our like sports people and famous people, movie stars. Just go classic here. Okay, and we'll click in. Also, I just heard a great story about Jackie Chan recently, which I don't have time to repeat, but here we go. All right, so where is his quote reference? His is under, is it under discussion? No, it's not under discussion. Sorry, guys.
Tammy, that one might be in the intermediate one. I'm not sure if the
is it in
ones have quotes.
Oh, does he? Oh, he has 2 levels.
Yes.
Now we're learning. Thanks, Tara. You probably saw me clicking into that and you're like, no, wrong one. Where's Jackie Chan's? Okay, we'll look for him. Oh, there are 2 Jackie Chan's right there. Perfect. All right. Thanks, Tara. All right. That was interesting to know. I'm always learning something every presentation. It's great. I think most teachers can identify that, right? You teach something and then you're like, oh, I learned so much from that. All right. So here we got his quote here, the reference, and then the speaking practice. We could do our, let's click into our personal response here to review the quote. So anyone who thinks I'm not scared out of my mind whenever I do one of my stunts is crazier than I am. So I think that would be a fun quote to get some of your students to respond to you who maybe are not so interested in these more like academic and abstract ideas. I think this is a great one to generate conversation, really fun, but also meaningful. All right. I think I'm going to show maybe 2 more, not the famous people. I want to show something totally different. We're going to go into functional English. I had to record I was allowed to record a video for you guys, a tutorial video, and I did this one and it was so much fun. I enjoyed doing this recording, and so I thought your students are absolutely going to love it. It's within our lessons under the functional English, and functional English is a category aimed at like talking about going to the doctor or riding the bus, just really practical everyday things, right? It's functional. So in here, we have a very fun lesson on making excuses. And I think that that is a great one for your students, especially if they're students that are not always so interested in English, I think this could be really exciting for them. It's under the information area, and we're going to click into making excuses and go into our task player. All right, and so within the making excuses area, one of the activities that I love is this assessment B. This is so fun. Basically, it gives you a prompt, a situation, a scenario, right? You don't want to go to a social event after work. You have to make an excuse to tell your boss, which like none of us have ever done, right? So, you know, you're invited to that after hour Zoom call and you're going to do a casual meeting and you're like, oh, I'm so tired. I don't want to do that. So what do? I think that's fun. And here's another one. This one's really cool. They listen to a friend's excuse and then they need to respond to the friend. And it's telling them, in this case, you're going to accept her excuse, right? Okay, yeah, fine. I believe you. So really, really fun where they're doing a listen and then a response. Cool topic. Okay. And I want to show one more that's more visual for your students, again, if they're a little bit lower level. And then if we have a minute, we can respond to any questions. Although I think Tara and Tanya probably have that under control. I would like to show one last resource in our visual learning section. And visual learning is really fun. I found the ice cream one yesterday and I was excited and I wanted to show you that one, but I think I'm going to show you a different one instead. This is the space story or ocean story. Which one do I want to show you? Our picture prompts. Again, this is one that has multiple levels. So there's fairy tale, let me zoom in for you. Fairy tale, space story, and ocean story. I'm going to show you the space story. Ocean story is beautiful, by the way. And here, this is really similar to the language scenes, but there's just a little more built up and it's about planning a story. So let me click on the reference. So the reference tells them what a story needs, and it works their way through. It needs a title, it needs a setting, it needs a problem, it needs a solution, right? And then the speaking task is to have your students actually tell a story. So they look at this story, and then they're going to do the same thing, record their answer. And if they forget what all these elements are, right, and they can click to view the reference, and the reference will remind them, here's all of these pieces. So they can click record, and they can view the reference if they need to, but they've got this picture to really inspire them. So I can see a dog, I can see a ball, and then they can tell a story about it. And I lied, I'm going to show the ocean story as well too, just because I think it's so pretty. And then I'll stop. Let's go back to that visual learning. It would just be wrong not to show you guys this ocean story. Click into the task player here. And again, we have our image. I'm going to just click on the tell a story task. Remember, these are great to assign your students to do outside of class. And look at how pretty that is. I mean, I don't know what the story is quite yet, but I'm really already like generating something. I see a pirate ship. I see the seahorses. And on the left-hand side, they're going to get all of that like vocab practice as well if you do this as a lesson with them. All right, so I know that was a ton of different ideas, and I hope that it generated some ideas for what you could do with your students. You can find a really exciting picture and have your students tell stories. It doesn't have to come from our website, right? It can come from anywhere, but if you do want to use our website, we have some beautiful ones for you. Okay, are there any questions I can respond to, or do you guys have that pretty much under control?
I think we were able to answer most of the questions here. There was one question about how they could incorporate our speaking tasks or our flashcards with Flipgrid. So just to mention what we mentioned before, or what Ellii mentioned, we do have a discovery page on Flipgrid where we put some of our prompts there, but now we actually have our own speaking task, so we're pretty excited about that. We don't have all the fun features that Flipgrid has, but definitely watch our Discovery Partner page, and you can try some of our prompts there. We add about 20 new ones every quarter, so that's a good space to watch.
Fantastic. All right. So I think I'm switching hats again. Thank you, Tara and Tanya, for handling all of those questions. See, we had a very busy chat area over there. All right. So have fun at the social hour. At the end of the social hour, we're going to do a wrap up. We'll send a little notification. Everyone can be brought back into this room. We'll hear from Ben, and then we can all relax and enjoy the rest of our days. And for those of you where it is getting quite late, thanks for joining us so far.